Okay, I think we can get started now. Yeah, as I said, welcome to everyone who's joined us so far for tonight's LFF Live session with Rachael Maskell MP. Um, Tonight we will be chatting about the recent local elections, as well as the potential upcoming Labour leadership contest, which is all over the news at the moment. So first, just to introduce Rachael, Rachael Maskell is the Labour and Cooperative MP for York Central. She has been the MP for the seat since 2015, May 2015. And before becoming an MP, Rachael was a care worker and also worked as a physiotherapist in the NHS for 20 years. She has held two shadow cabinet positions in her time as an MP. She was Shadow Environment Secretary from 2016 to 2017 and Shadow Employment Secretary in 2020. Last year, she was one of four Labour MPs who was suspended from the party for opposing the government's planned disability cuts, a move by the Prime Minister that was met with some controversy at the time. But thankfully, Rachael subsequently had the whip reinstated in November last year. She's a member of Mainstream, or at least put her name to was a signatory on the sort of founding letter, which is a centre-left group co-founded by Open Labour and Compass, which was founded in September last year. And the group was formed to challenge narrow factionalism at the top of the Labour Party and also to push the party to enact bolder change on key issues and to stop the rise of reform. So before we get stuck into discussion, I just wanted to let you know that you can put any questions that you have in the webinar chat that we've got there. Just as we're talking, if anything comes to mind, feel free to pop a question in the chat. So I wanted to start with asking you about the local elections, Rachael. Obviously, Labour lost around, well, just under 1,500 seats, and Reform also gained a similar number. Why do you think that Labour suffered those losses, these elections?
Well, first of all, I think we really feel for those councillors which had served their communities so well over many years, for some many decades, and to not have them representing their communities is a massive loss. And we've got to recognise that their voices are not going to be the ones that are heard in the council chambers. They're not going to be the ones that hold the surgeries and make those interventions. And ultimately, they're not the ones that are going to make decisions over local communities. And as a result of that, we are going to see, as we've already seen, the spectacle at some of these new councillors not knowing what they're doing, don't understand what standing orders are, or motions and resolutions, and all the rest of it that we've seen. Some of them not even taking their seats. And I think there's 8 by-elections already underway after those local elections. But it was a devastating loss for Labour. I think we can recognise that. I was fortunate not to have elections this year in York, but I went and worked in Leeds, and I heard a consistent message on the doorstep. People are working harder than ever and are really struggling. They're not feeling the change that a Labour government should be bringing. I appreciate we're early into a Labour administration. It takes time to turn the tanker around, not least when we had such a horrendous inheritance from the Tories. But also, people were disillusioned, dissatisfied, and disgruntled about the leadership. And I think there was barely a door I knocked on, even if they were going to kind of vote for Labour, where people didn't raise Keir Starmer as an issue, and believe that he didn't have the skills and the breadth to instill confidence in them. And as a result, that was influencing very much the vote that they were placing. It wasn't a referendum on the local council, it was on the national leadership. I understand the same was reflected on the doorsteps in Scotland and Wales for the parliaments. And as a result of that, Labour lost. And when we lose elections, we know that communities are worse off. So ultimately, we have to find a way forward as a party to rebuild that confidence, rebuild the whole a kind of political agenda as well, which really speaks into the communities, particularly those communities which Labour was founded to represent and to be the voice of, and to see radical change, not only at the centre, but pushing out from the centre into communities, and to ensure that we have got that policy agenda, which is going to transform our society, and ultimately stop Nigel Farage getting the keys to number 10, which for me is the only game in town now. And we've really got to be focused on enabling Labour to move forward with strength, with breadth, and with the policies that are going to make a real difference.
Do you think that Keir Starmer can remain as Prime Minister? And I mean, obviously, the conversation has shifted a lot recently towards an eventual Labour leadership contest. But do you think that Keir Starmer could remain and enact policies that do sort of convince people that Labour can create more change? And if so, what policies does he need to focus on?
I think we heard from Keir Starmer straight after the elections when he made that address, and nothing really changed within that. He said he got it, and I'm not convinced he did. And then kind of doubled down in the days after. And I think ultimately people didn't want more of the same of kind of transactional politics of triangulation and trying to kind of square things. People wanted a Labour story to tell, and Keir Starmer doesn't tell a story. We
Mm.
had 50 pieces of legislation in the last Parliament, and it doesn't thread into a wonderful story that we can just kind of speak about on the doorstep or talk about across the media. And I think ultimately that says something.
Mm.
The technocratic governments are not what people want. People want that leadership to understand the air they're breathing, to understand what the vision is, to be able to go on that journey, however hard it is, to see the transformation. And that isn't the politics. I mean, I've got kind of some assessment of what's going on. I think we're seeing a very top-down authoritarian approach to politics. That isn't the nature of our party. It will be that of others. But if you think about the Labour Party, formed in the boiler rooms of the kind of industrial space where people literally fought one another for that political voice and that franchise to be able to advance the policies to transform our society very much from the grassroots up, and to ensure that that diversity of voice was then well debated and distilled into policy to bring that transformation to communities. And I think we've seen over the decades, and I would say, increasingly with Tony Blair and since this kind of presidential approach to politics, I don't think it works. And ultimately, I think the response is mass devolution of power and resources, to trust local communities to know what they're doing best, but also to give that national guidance and leadership that is needed. I think,
Mm.
secondly, the relationship between Parliament and the executive and the government has got to change. Parliament is largely dismissed. We've heard today big announcements being made, but not to Parliament, to the media. The Speaker had a lot to say to that, but you can't bypass Parliament because that's your accountability system. That holds you in check. That ensures policy is robust. And I think we need to see Parliament playing a far bigger role, that pre-legislative scrutiny, being able to look at bills before they're written, pulling together the ideas from all the different breadths and expressions of our country to ensure that we have got good policy in place, to dismiss things that aren't popular and aren't wanted, and to ensure that we're advancing things which are needed. And therefore, I think Parliament has got to come to the fore as we move forward, but also we need government to take its hands a little bit more off the reins and to take that step ahead and to tell the story, to provide the leadership, but not to micromanage. And when we bring forward legislation, let's make sure it's right, because I've seen too many times poor bills coming to the House of Commons and then the House of Lords has to unpick it and put it together. We need the elected chamber to do the work. So I want to see real change in the way our constitution is working as well.
Hmm. And you mentioned quite early on that obviously the Keir Starmer came up a lot on the doorstep, that people were sort of disgruntled with his leadership. There was some YouGov polling today um, that found that Labour lost almost 4 times as many voters to the Greens than to Reform. Do you think Labour's been taking that threat seriously enough?
I think we haven't had the policy agenda that I would want to see, which is that more that kind of radical progression, that transformation that we need, whether that is on the sustainable agenda. And of course, we haven't heard really the Prime Minister talking much about that real kind of focus on securing our biodiversity, seeing that transformation around climate, providing that leadership on the national stage. I think Ed Miliband is doing a sound job, but we've got to remember when government came in, the 28 billion pounds that were promised, will scale back, particularly on the retrofit programme. And we need to ensure that we are building for the future. Our planet is very fragile and it is slipping away from us. And it is obviously the reason why we're seeing extreme weather events. The ice cap is melting at such a frightening pace. And that's accelerating. Of course, we're seeing as a result conflict, starvation, and floods across the world. So we really need to get a grip on those progressive green agendas, but also look at how we have that more progressive economic policy, which I think is really the heartbeat of what we should be about. Seeing redistribution, seeing where the taxation falls, and ultimately there's too much being placed on the shoulders of workers and too little on those that earn investments, inheritance, and assets. And we've got to flip that equation, because ultimately, the more you have, the more you should put into a system and proudly want to invest in the society you live in, because more inequitable societies, of the work of Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson show through the Spirit Level, their book, is that the more inequitable society, the worse society is for everyone. So everyone's got an interest in contributing according to means, and we need to see that more, and also to ensure that people across our communities do have those basics, have enough money to live off. Too many families don't. We still have got poverty, 14.5 million people in our country. We need to ensure that we have got the housing that we need, particularly council and social housing. And it always seems developers first, and that shouldn't be the way. And then ultimately that people can pay the bills. So bringing those public utilities back into public ownership, and particularly we think about water, but also our energy as well. So there's an ambitious programme that Labour should have. The 1945 government did it with very little means, and we should have equal ambition to really transform our country.
And you spoke about workers sort of effectively paying in more than people who sort of accrue vast amounts of wealth. Do you what policy would you bring in to change that? You
Well,
sort
I
of
have
referring to a
long
wealth.
argued for a wealth tax,
Yeah.
but I do think we need to look at corporation tax and the equalisation there. We know that, again, billions will be generated as a result of that. And I do think we have to look at things like financial transaction taxes, because, again, what was classed as the Robin Hood tax, being able to take from those with the greatest wealth buckets to be able to share between the rest of society. We really do need to look at redistribution, because the way the sums are adding up, it is totally unfair. It's unfair, I see it on small businesses, when big businesses seem to have so much more opportunity. It seems, of course, on households where those with very little seem to get the very worst services as well, and the worst conditions and the worst housing. And it's just an unjust society, and we really need to look at that. In my city of York, we're doing that 125 years since Seaborn Mowbray produced his first report on poverty. It means a lot to our city, and we're looking at how do we re-envisage that in 2026 to bring about a generational change in the way that our city works.
Hmm. So I wanted to sort of move on to the potential Labour leadership contest. So I know you've said that Labour needs a new leader, and that you would support Andy Burnham to become the next Labour leader. Obviously, having a new Labour leader in itself is not going to sort of create change, but it's the policy platform, I guess, that is more important. What do you make of Andy Burnham's policy platform? I know you've mentioned sort of nationalisation of water and utilities, which is one of his pledges. But yeah, well, what do you make of it broadly?
Well, I think, first of all, the reasons we need a new culture is, yes, the policy platform, and secondly, the culture. within the Labour Party and within politics. And I think on the issue of policy, I think talking about council housing, absolutely essential reindustrialisation, of course, with the modern industries that we have today to ensure people have got good quality jobs. Still, the gig economy seems to hold its place, and we need to move forward. Of course, the Employment Rights Bill will help address some of the injustices within that, but that is not going to be enough. So, moving forward with a an opportunity for people to acquire the jobs, the skills that they need to really make a difference in society, crucial. But also moving forward, as Andy has set out, on, as you say, the public utilities. They're the kind of policies that we need to see. I know there's a lot of speculation at the moment about issues like immigration and where he's going to land on those issues. We do need reform in the system. Of course, we look at the figures today and immigration levels have fallen, but we've got to look at where the fall is happening. And what I would say is we know as an ageing society, we do not have the care workers we need. We do not have, as the workforce ages, the people working in construction, we're the people working in engineering, the people working across our NHS. So we have to look at how do we rebuild the labour force that we need in the short term and then clearly in the long term as well. And also, how do we deal with this ageing demographic, which is really having a bearing on more developed countries at the moment, and looking at how we see that movement of people. I mean, there has been nods that there will be more freedom of movement across Europe for young people. Is that going to be sufficient? I mean, there's some simple policies that I do want to see addressed. For instance, for international students, we know that they're the cash cow essentially of the higher education sector, and yet more and more restrictions are making them choose to go to other places to study, and that's destabilising higher education and its funding. So we have to have a mature approach, and I don't think we've got to the right place on those kind of policies. And also, we've got to ensure that when people come, that there's obviously the proper checks, balances, integration, etc. But also, we've got to prevent things like modern slavery, which is also happening across our economy in alarming rates.
Mm. There has been some concern among progressives that Andy Burnham said that he would sort of back Shabana Mahmood's more controversial immigration reforms in terms of making refugee status temporary and her changes to indefinite leave to remain. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I haven't
Do you
heard him
see?
say that firsthand, and when I go to
Mhm.
midfield, I obviously want to know more.
Yeah.
But I think what I would say is, there's a lot of speculation at the moment. I'm very clear that, as I said in the debate, our word is our bond, and we gave people assurances that when they came here that there'll be 5 years indefinite leave to remain. I believe that we should stay by that. I mean, the government are talking up to 20 years, and then deportations for people that come through irregular routes. People flee their security for a reason. And I think we have to understand that, but also bring with them so much into our country. And I think we've got to look at what that opportunity means for us as well. So, yes, I do want to stop small boats crossing the channel because it's dangerous, and tragically, too many people have lost their lives. And I really do fear, every single story that comes, because we've got a responsibility within that. I'd much rather have a more regulated system where people can make those applications, and if they abide by the criteria of our international obligations, then of course we should fulfil that. And stopping things like family routes has been a real negative draw. And as I say, international students, it has a bearing. Some people in the higher education sector, like in the care sector, have abused that system and not abided by it properly. And they should be the ones that are called to account rather than kind of stopping some of those routes. And of course, when we think about people from Afghanistan not having those safe routes to come here after the commitments we made to those people, Syria likewise, I think we've got to really think through what we do in a destabilised world. And of course, we had a different discussion when we were part of the EU, and as part of Dublin now, obviously Dublin moves on in June to a new agreement across Europe. But being part of a European federation looking at immigration is the right way forward, because this is an international issue because of climate reasons and conflict reasons. And we've got to have a look at one, how do we build more stability in the world? And of course, cutting the aid budget is not the answer to that. And I really do implore that the Treasury look at restoring 0.7% of GDP for international development. Yes, use it in a more strategic way, but also that we look at how we can use defence more strategically using our soft power, which we know is incredible what the British Army are able to do and our armed forces in building stability in destabilised countries. Rather than just looking at investing in warheads and
Mm.
defence machinery and capability. And then thirdly, looking at our diplomacy as well and ensuring that we are really advancing diplomacy and using, again, the skill base that we've got in that arena to build a more stable world. And the mechanisms of old are not working. International humanitarian law is slow to be applied, and we know that the UN does not have the teeth that we would want to see. And therefore, it's really important that we work with partners and invest in our foreign policy to build greater stability.
Hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about Brexit as well, because that's another area where Andy Burnham has sort of softened his stance and said that he would support rejoining in the longer term, but it's not something he will be sort of reopening the conversation on at this point. Given that Brexit is obviously costing the UK economy, well, according to Bloomberg last year, 100 billion a year, and also the electorate seems to uh, sort of quite broadly believe that it was more of a failure than a success, of 61% of voters saying that last year. So do you not think that Burnham should commit to fully rejoining the EU?
First of all, I think we have to be really pragmatic about this. If we think about the way that the Tory party ripped us out of the EU, they stormed out, breaking the relationships that we had, and kind of it was a kind of a scorched earth policy almost of leaving, and has been since that very poor negotiation framework which they left us with, the EU UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Of course, we've got to renegotiate that. We've got to build bridges. We've got to have the relationships with different member states as well as the EU as a whole. That doesn't happen overnight. It's not in our gifting to just walk back in. And I think we've got to dispel that as well. So building relationships is that first phase. And I think, Labour has grasped the opportunity and the importance of that and has started on that journey, which is right. But obviously, when we know that the EU is our strongest trading partner, we need to have the most robust trading arrangements with the EU as we possibly can. As you say, I've read the OBR saying 120 billion a year we lose as a result of being outside of the EU. So I find this question difficult because I represent a very strongly Remain city,
Mhm.
and myself made the arguments that we shouldn't leave because of the kind of the poverty that it will create, and we can see that with the stagnation of our economy. The relationships were great, but also, the cultural benefits that we had of being able to live, interchangeably with our European friends. So I think, it's got to be a steady as we go
Do you
policy.
think do you think Burnham's position is correct then at this point?
So I think it's probably a realistic assessment of where we are, where we go in the long term. I think we have got to make that kind of assessment, but we've got to bring our country together first and foremost, and therefore I'd say there are steps to go through. Our country at the moment is completely divided, and it's been divided since 2016. And I think, this is why I fear reform, because Nigel Farage and his party are disruptors of the system. They divide communities. And I want to see unity in our communities first. And that's why I do believe Andy Burnham brings such strength with his leadership, because he is a unifier. Look what he's done across Manchester. He brought that community together, and we need to bring our country together in all of our communities. And therefore, when I talk about York, it is a lovely bubble because people are very much in a positive, unified space. But I go to other places in the country, and that's not the story that I see.
Mm.
So, how can we move forward and talk about Europe? Well, we've still got this division at home, and we've got to win each argument one by one, and ensure that the public have got confidence of where we are heading, but also not to take those steps without the country with us. And I think if government just go into Europe and crash in, we'll crash out again, and then burn even more bridges. So I don't think that's the right approach. So I do think step by step, bring the unity, and then have the dialogue, and make sure that we co-produce our future relationship with our communities.
Mm. And we were speaking just before the call about how you'll be visiting Makerfield to do some campaigning soon. And I suppose that for Andy Burnham, one of the issues is that Makerfield was a sort of more heavily vote leave constituency compared to others, that 60 around 66% of voters backed Brexit in 2016. So do you think that that's part of part of the piece for that for this election campaign is really like bringing people together and sort of easing that division that you were talking about?
We have to go back further than Brexit myself, because I believe the real damage was obviously 2008 and the economic crash, and then that was deepened with the Tories' austerity measures of 2011, the George Osborne famous budget. And I think as a result of that, communities were really pushed into hardship. They had their basic services stripped away from them. They had, we saw salaries flatlining while the cost of living was going up. And that's where I think we have to start the reparation. So talking about Brexit, it feels to me it's further down the road, whereas we've got
Mm,
this immediacy in front of us where people have now lived for nearly 2 decades in real hardship. And we can't sustain this inequality and the pain that so many people are feeling. So I think we've got to go back to that point and to say, how do we ensure that we've got the jobs in place, the houses that people need? And we've got to remember, in our country, we've got like 1 million homes which are not first owned homes. In my own city, 2,000 Airbnbs. I mean, there's
mm,
injustices everywhere we look. So let's sort out the housing, the jobs, and of course our public services as well. And I read the report from the Socialist Health Association, which said that probably the waiting lists in real terms have only dropped by about 20,000 since Labour came in, because most of those people were administratively removed from the list. So as a result of that, the NHS, I spoke to NHS workers last weekend in my constituency. They said how stressed they are, they're on their knees, they're breaking. We've got to address those kind of issues in the immediacy, because that's where the emergency sits. People need to feed themselves and heat their homes and do those basics, but then move on to those wider discussions about how do we rebuild our country on a European stage, but also a global stage in the light of the instabilities that we are seeing. So do we continue to lean into the US, or do we look closer to Europe, which is obviously where many of us feel we've got far more in common, and will be able to build greater stability?
hmm So just back to Makerfield, the obviously in the recent local elections, Reform did they won 24 out of 25 seats on Wigan Council that were up for grabs. Do you think that Andy Burnham faces quite a steep hill to climb with this by-election? What do you think his chances are?
I think because Andy Burnham is Andy Burnham, I think he would have won the Gorton and Denton by-election had he been allowed to stand on the doorstep, because people were saying to me when I was over there, and I appreciate it's a short time, but in a couple of communities, but they were saying they would have voted for Andy Burnham but weren't able to because he wasn't standing. So I do think he brings his own style of politics with him, and I think it is a generous style of politics, one that is really about inclusion, bringing people together, wanting people to be part of something bigger. And he is, let's face it, in Manchester, the strongest economy in our country now, being able to integrate that transport system, get the public services working in a stronger way, and really seeing the benefit of that. And he's got that Mancunian spirit. And I think, obviously he represented a constituency just down the road. This is his home turf, literally. And therefore, I do think, he's got his own brand, and I think it will carry him through in this by-election. The competency he has, and what I would say to the people in Makerfield, they're going to have somebody with incredible advocacy who will always have their feet firmly in their constituency. They couldn't ask for more on that basis, because that will be his testing ground for the policies he brings forward and the approach he takes. But also, he's always been a strong constituency MP, and I'm sure he'll bring that forward as well. So balancing the opportunity there. So I would say the people in Makerfield should be feeling that their day has come, and this is a great opportunity for them.
Obviously, Reform has put forward a sort of local plumber candidate. But there have been concerns around him and his social media activity. He's shared some posts from far-right figures associated with Tommy Robinson, and made some concerning comments about like white people being chased around by Asian people and things like this. Like, what do you think? How do you think, like, on the left, we need to be sort of exposing this kind of thing and sort of highlighting that, that's the sort of behaviour that some of Reform candidates are kind of, um, yeah,
Yeah, I
displaying.
mean, as I was saying earlier, Reform have got an agenda to be disruptors and to divide. And do we really want to live in a high stressed society where people don't speak to each other, people are cross with each other, they're pointing fingers, or do we want to be in a society which may not be perfect, but we can rub along, we can get by, that we can, live in a society and build that strength in those relationships? And I certainly know that where I'd rather live, and I think what we have seen with kind of these very angry, aggressive approaches from people on the far right is that they're setting out the kind of society we could be leaning into in the future if we continue on this path. And we've got to, I mean, I describe it as like we need some healing in our nation. We need that kind of coming together. We need a bit of truth speaking. We need to speak to each other a lot more. I really do believe we need to build a stronger society, but certainly the position of the far right in Reform is not going to lead us to a healthier, better society. I mean, we just look at Nigel Farage at the moment. Here he is taking his 5 billion in cryptocurrency. There's question over his I'm a celebrity money as well, and his 1.4 million house. This isn't a man that's from the working people, with the interests of working people. He says it, and I listen carefully to his speeches he makes, particularly in America. This is the same Nigel Farage over there. He talks about his love for money and getting rich, and that's his ambition, is to have lots of money. Well, he's going to be, if we're not careful, in number 10. What's his ambition? Is it going to change? No, he's going to usurp the trust of the working classes to give him power to then make him and his mates rich. That is, and divide our society at the same time. That is
Mm.
not what our country
So sort of
needs.
Donald Trump style.
Oh, and it will play
Mm.
up to him, of
Mm.
course. So, we've really got to think carefully before putting that cross in the box and think, actually, what do we want for our families? Do we want, our society to get on, to see greater equality, to see, fairness and justice and those values which we've got to extenuate further? Or do we want somebody who's going to exploit us all and ultimately divide us all? And divided societies are not happy societies. So I really do urge people, think again. Labour may not have been perfect, and I would certainly agree with that. But we've got to work together to build what we want. And I think if Andy can adopt that bottom-up approach to politics, bringing people together to really help shape our future, then we will be a lot safer, a lot more secure, and a lot more happy as a society.
Hmm. Just on the 5 million payment that Nigel Farage didn't declare before, so he received before he became an MP, but didn't declare. The Parliamentary Standards Commission is obviously looking into that. But he was found to have made 17 breaches, I think, in January, for declaring payments late. Do you think the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner will take more action this time? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So, because, rules are rules, and I think one of the the problems people have got with politicians and trust in politics is the fact that they believe that politicians, aren't honest and are rule breakers. And here we've got somebody who's blatantly a rule breaker, trying to conceal his crypto funding and to the tunes of millions of pounds, hiding that from the public view. And as a result of that, I think he does need to be called to account in the same way that I'd expect any MP to be called to account. And of course, we know that the sanctions could be extremely high on that if we think about some of the ways that people have broken the rules before in Parliament, and there could be a recall commission a petition as a result of this. I don't know what standards will determine, but I think this is really serious when high stakes money is being funneled. And of course, it wasn't just about the 5 million that went into his back pocket. It was the 12 million that then went into his party's pocket, as a result of that relationship. So we do need to call out the money in politics, and we need to clean it up as well. And that's why I've always argued trade union money, it comes from working people who really believe in a better society and they donate it to the Labour Party. And long may that continue. It's the cleanest money in politics.
And with the elections bill, the People's Representation Bill, obviously there's a moratorium on cryptocurrency donations, but there's still not a cap on individual donations at this point. Do you think that Keir Starmer or Andy Burnham, whoever, continues as Prime Minister or becomes Prime Minister, should put a cap on donations to political parties?
I do. And what I would say is when we're looking at things like trade union donations, we've got to look at every member's little contribution. It's like the perfect crowdsourcing that the unions gather that money from from the members and then they donate it to the Labour Party. So I absolutely do think we should be looking at donors. And I think it's always really interesting to look through those registers of financial interest to see, who is donating, because you've got to ask. I mean, Wes Streeting received, significant funding from private health companies when he was Secretary of State for Health. And you've got to say, what is their interest? Why would they donate to that individual unless they were trying to buy influence and voice? And if they're buying influence and voice, why should they have more voice than the people across our communities? Let's call it out, let's clean it up, and let's get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Sort of related to this with the elections bill, was just a question I had around proportional representation. Do you think that's another area that Andy Burnham is definitely supportive of? But he's indicated that he wouldn't change the voting system before the next election. Do you think it should be changed before the next election? What voting system would you like to see in place?
Yeah, I mean, again, another big question about how do we ensure people have got more franchise in our politics, and I think that's really important. And I do think we're not a two-party state anymore, and I think we've got to look at that carefully. I've been supportive of seeing electoral reform, and I really want to ensure that with that, though, we maintain the constituency link and we ensure that we don't allow extremist parties to be able to hold power, because I really fear the day if that were to occur. So having certain thresholds and things like that can try and eliminate some of those minority but extremist parties. But I think, I would agree that is this the priority that everyone is talking around their dinner table about? And I don't think it is. So I think having that national conversation first, of course, is important because it is such a major change as well. I think it has to come forward in a manifesto. So I don't think it is for this term because we were elected on a manifesto, and my understanding is that Andy Burnham will want to deliver on the manifesto we were elected, because quite frankly, if you're going to have a completely different manifesto, I think you have to owe it to a country that you have a general election, and that's not what's being indicated at all. So the manifesto people elected for needs to be implemented. Of course, there's flexibility in how you implement it, and I really hope Andy brings kind of real refreshed ways of doing that.
We had a question from another member of the Left Foot Forward team about whether if Andy Burnham were to become leader, do you think that he should reinstate the Labour whip to Jeremy Corbyn? even though Jeremy Corbyn is
I do. I
leader.
think it's a really interesting question, and part of that's a question for Jeremy, isn't it? Does he want to
Mm,
be back in the Labour Party? But I think what we've learned, and I think, we've obviously watched Al Jazeera, Labour Files, we've, read the fraud, we've seen the Labour Together documents being dripped out at the moment, and the injustices served against Jeremy Corbyn. I do believe there should be a day when justice is served, and as a result of that, I do believe that Jeremy should be allowed back into the Labour Party, should he choose to do that. Well, I think we want to build a broad coalition with progressive people, and Jeremy, we know, is so loved in his community, and to serve as a Labour MP would be, absolutely right for that community. So I very much hope there will be a day when people like Jeremy Corbyn will be able to call Labour their home, as so many people that are no longer in the Labour family. I really
mm,
hope that Andy is able to draw them back in if he gets
yeah.
the leadership, of course,
Mm,
and to be able to rebuild our party into that mass movement of progress across our society again.
mhm. Yeah, I suppose this does link into your perhaps your experience of having the whip removed. There was a question from a reader about if the leader of a team refuses to accept new ideas and concepts and is not open to discussion from team members, how successful will that team be? As such, why has Keir Starmer refused to accept new ideas and concepts and thoughts of team members since becoming Prime Minister? Why do you think there's been that sort of
Yeah, I mean,
potentially defensiveness?
yeah, I think this question's really at the heart of the leadership, the Premiership, and about Keir Starmer's style. And I've said it very clearly. I think Keir Starmer, whether it's the lawyer in him or the lack of political experience, is that he seems to have pushed everybody away as opposed to trying to draw in if there's disagreement. Instead of suspending people, he should have had the curiosity to try and understand why were issues like child poverty and disabled people having their PIP removed, or indeed older people having their winter fuel allowance removed. Why are issues of poverty of such importance to Labour politicians? I mean, for me, the answer is obvious, but he never showed that curiosity. Instead, he threw people out of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And I think that says something. If you push, and it was very much well put by my constituents during my time in suspension, if I didn't have a place in the Parliamentary Labour Party, how could they? And I think if you push people away, then you're pushing the rest of society away and say, we don't want you. And quite frankly, people got that message and voted in different ways. And that's why I do think everyone should be on the pitch. And I trust that Andy will do that, to not park his backbenchers on the side bench, which is effectively
Mhm.
what Keir Starmer has seen as just as lobby fodder. And I think that the breadth of experience and talent and, decades and decades of campaigning for the Labour Party, of people that have been in the party far, far longer than him, I just think it's contempt for our movement. And I really want to see our movement draw together, every bit of talent and skill used, and because we need it, and everyone feeling part of something bigger. Often when they're saying it's like your government are delivering this, I kind of feel, well, I'm not even, having a say
Mm,
as a backbencher. And I would say there are exceptions, and I have to kind of, single out some politicians who have really reached across the breadth of the party because they have that interest, and including cabinet members, but it's not common. And I think, the authoritarian centralist approach just does not work. So that's why I think the culture of the Labour Party has to revert to what it was, what it's meant to be, and what everybody can feel a part of in the future.
mhm. We had another question from a reader about social care. So the person says your government needs to show some practical achievements. What about social care? We can't afford to wait for yet another report, the Louise Casey report that's due to come out in 2028. And they say that I know this is a subject which interests you. Yeah, what are your thoughts around that? Around the social
I
care?
think we know, yeah, I think we know kind of what needs to be done. I think the profiteering out of frail, elderly, disabled people is an absolute disgrace. And I think we've got to rip the private sector out and to ensure that we've got a public service for the public good. And as a result of that, we need to restructure it and we need to integrate it with health. Our health service is failing because people can't get out of hospital because we don't have a integrated social care workforce where people are, trained and treated with dignity and respect at work, and because basically people are on low minimum wages doing really important jobs. And I think we've really got to put the investment in, but also remodel the system so it's much more integrated. In York, where we've got a frailty hub, which is kind of bridging the gap between health and social care, we've seen phenomenal outcomes, but also it's cutting costs because we're getting people out of hospital, and as a result of that, they're not having the huge expenditure which hospital draws, and people are at home and they've got the NHS is paying for social care to keep those people at home while they're setting up the kind of social services perspective. So we've got a great model in our city, and I want to see, it's integrated with palliative care. It's doing really, really good things, and I want to see that being rolled out. So I think we've got a great model that we could extenuate across the country and ensure that everyone's got access to. And therefore, I don't know if we really need more and more reviews and all of these consultations, when I think we've got proven models now to draw, and we just got to get on with it and stop talking about it. And I worked with Andy when he put forward those proposals in the past. I was head of health at Unite, and he was in the top job in government, and just looking at what we needed to do there, or a leader kind of for health in the opposition, and putting forward those proposals. I just think he needs to dust them down really, and get on with it, because I want to see this integration with social care and health in this parliament, because how much longer, how many more decades can we waste discussing and consulting? Let's just press ahead and get this resolved.
Hmm. But obviously, a lot of care homes now are like gradually council care homes have been sold off, and as you say, the private sector is predominantly running the care sector. Do you think that the key would be for whoever is the Prime Minister to sort of come in and build more sort of council-run care homes, or how would you
I
what would you
think the
say the
model of care
solution?
has changed as well. And yes, we do need residential accommodation. We need to ensure that, and I do believe public provision is always the best. But I do think we need to have a look at that. Most of the social care is provided to domiciliary settings. And as a result of that, that's where we could make the fastest changes. So that's really
Like
what I
just
want to see.
directly employing care workers, you mean, through.
Absolutely, or setting up cooperatives as well. I
Mm.
mean, that's seeing money reinvested back into that. And Kirklees had really successful, I think it was Kirklees, or
Hmm.
was it Calder Valley? Had West Yorkshire had a really successful care co-op, and so I think the cooperative model works equally as well. And I know the co-op party is doing some really significant work on this. So as a result of that, I do think we should be looking at a kind of a new model, and just let's get it out there. Let's just do it. I think that's
Hmm.
the problem. It's like everybody's always waiting, and there's
Yeah.
talks, and we just get so frustrated. Just get on and govern. What a
Mhm.
difference that will make.
I just had one more question from a reader about the Disability Confidence Scheme. They ask if the review taking place needs more power to impose fines on companies that fail to support people with a disability or use this as a tick box exercise.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because governments are saying, we need more disabled people into work, and then people just face multiple barriers and can't get into work. I mean, access to work, the waiting lists are unbearable. No employer is going to wait around for the reasonable adjustments to be put in place or services to be brought in when people are waiting, 18, 20 weeks to get the basic support that they need to be able to access work. So employers are employing non-disabled people as a result. So
Mm.
access to work is a crucial part of that. Disability confident. We used to have the two-tick system. I think we need more teeth in the system, more accountability, and employers, really do need to see this as the most important mechanism to get people into work. So if they're not fulfilling their obligations, and then there is an issue. And I think if we are talking about getting disabled people into work, and if you think that's the DWP's rightful objective, then what I would say is government have got to help as well. So it's got to be a partnership in making this work. But if employers are blocking disabled people, having the support they need, then clearly accountability is the cause, and proper recourse.
Mhm. Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight for tonight's LFF live session, and for sharing lots of interesting points on the local elections and the Makerfield by-election, etc. Just a quick note for everyone who's listening: the next LFF live date for your diary is the 24th of June at 6 p.m. We'll be hearing from a campaigner at anti-privatisation group We Own It. And I've also put links in the chat to our YouTube channel so you can rewatch all of our LFF live sessions. And there are also links to our social media accounts so you can keep up to date on everything that we're doing. And if you're interested in the discussions that we've had this evening, particularly about reform, we have a weekly Substack newsletter called Right Wing Watch that comes out on the weekends, which basically covers everything around what the right is up to at the moment and scrutinises things that they're saying. All the links are there in the chat. I will now leave you to enjoy your evening. Thanks again to Rachael, and thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you.